Hello, everyone,
I'm Carl.
and I'm Em.
Welcome to our podcast discussing all of the latest books. This is our fifth episode, and we will be discussing 5 Feet Apart by Rachael Lippincott with Mickey Daughtry and Tobias Akanis. If I butchered that, I apologize. I am not German.
We promise to give you all of our honest opinions on all the characters, chapters, and scenarios. We don't mean any harm to any of the authors. This is solely our opinion. We promise to always call them like we read them.
Period. That's become my key thing I say every time you say it, so we're gonna have to stick with it because I can't. It's just so good.
You say period a lot.
I do say period a lot.
To get started, this is a shorter book, so my plan was just go chapter by chapter. We're, of course, going to save our ratings for the very end.
I wanted to read the dedication at the front before we begin.
Go for it.
Uh, So it says, we dedicate this book and the movie to all the patients, families, medical staff, and loved ones who bravely fight the battle against cystic fibrosis every day. We hope the story of Stella and Will helps to bring awareness to this disease and one day a cure.
And I also want to say that we're not experts or doctors or anything to be able to speak specifically on CF. So we're just going to stick, as far as when it comes to details like that, to the book and what it says.
Just before we get started, also, I know I've already showed the cover, but throughout the book, when it talks about the image that Abby drew, this is what was in my mind. If you've
Hmm.
watched the movie, this is not the image that's used in the movie. Don't know why they're not the same image, but this is what I pictured, and it is beautiful, and I'm obsessed with it.
It was what I pictured after you showed me the cover.
Oh, yes, and the one in the movie is beautiful, but it's not as beautiful as this one. So, just so you
Well,
know.
I have the one with the movie cover that has the Sprouse brother on it.
We love
So
Cole. It's beautiful.
he was my favorite brother. Shout out to you.
So I will say also, I watched the movie in preparation for this as well. And I had watched it before, but I watched it again after I read the book this time just for fun, just to cry some more. I
Full occasion, but
it
why
is
not
for
force it?
it is for me. No. But I will say that because I watched the movie before I read the book, Cole Sprouse is who I pictured as Will throughout this entire book. I pictured Stella a little bit different because I didn't remember who she was in the movie, which is one thing I don't like about watching the movie before the book because then it ruins some of the characters sometimes that I might have pictured differently. Or, and I won't say ruin, that might be too strong of a word, but it just like,
Doesn't let your imagination run.
yeah, correct. It doesn't let me picture what I picture and then watch it to see what somebody else pictured. So I will say that about that. But the book is
Well,
pretty good.
mine had little pictures and like snippets from the movie inside of it, so I got an idea of what they looked like from that
Cool.
versus actually like watching the movie.
I did not
But
know that. I did not know that had that. That's really cool. Well, also, let me just add this. If you've watched the movie and not read the book, and but you're listening to the podcast, the movie has most of the details in it. There are some things that are missed, and as we go through, we might, talk about that too. But most of the important stuff that's in the book is in the movie, so you get the gist.
so the first chapter, we get introduced to both Stella and Will. It's a dual perspective book, so it does have both of their perspectives going chapter by chapter, which the first one starts out with Stella, which she to me became more of the focus character to
I
be
agree.
said, because she had more of a tragic storyline.
I do love the
So
dual point of view, by the way.
same. What I really took from the first chapter was I really liked that her friends still came to visit her, because especially when she says that it's been pretty much her whole life, honestly, that she's been coming to the hospital. Usually, especially if you're not able to attend school regularly, you start losing your friends and stuff when you start getting really bad sick and things, or at least that's what I've heard. So I think that's often how it's portrayed in movies too, is that people lose their friends and things like that. So to me, it was very interesting to see that her friends still attempted to come. I mean, granted, they didn't really stay very long, things like that, but I mean, they did at least show up for her. So I did really appreciate that being part of the storyline, which of course we do find out that Will's friends do too, but it's basically just to steal the hospital room for a little bit so they can get it on and then leave kind of situation. But
They come
um,
back other times too.
well, that's the main point that you see until the very end of the book when they come back for, towards the end. But often I think it happens whenever a child gets sick that their parents put a little bit more weight on the child's shoulders. And I think that happened quite a bit with Stella. She basically had to brace her sister passing, her mom and dad getting a divorce, them stressing about her every move and what she's doing. It really saddened me that she drove herself to the hospital and basically lied to her parents that she was going to the hospital, which honestly, shouldn't a nurse knowing her for so long reach out to her family, or is that just me? Mm.
I don't know. I guess because she was just checking in, and until they had to actually do something for her surgically, they did. At that point, they called the parents just to let them know.
Yeah.
But I will say too that I don't think it was the intention of the parents to put the weight on her shoulders. I think it was unintentional, but
No, no.
they absolutely should have been more cognizant of what they were saying and how they were acting, and how that obviously would have impacted Stella. I can't imagine like fighting for my life every single day, but doing so because I'm afraid that my parents won't survive if I don't survive. But like I know I'm terminal, so it's inevitable. I don't. That just seems like
I personally
such a great
think that a
burden.
lot of that played into like her OCD as well, like her need to control what she could control. I
Yeah,
think that really emphasized, which I mean, I have OCD, but hers was like on another level. I no longer have to color code or anything like that. Like I've worked myself out of those behaviors, but I still have to do certain things a certain amount of times and stuff like that. But
yeah,
I think that hers was just on a next level thing, which honestly to me that was a little bit of a trigger because I was just like, oh, my pill bottles are not organized in my cabinet. Like, should I probably go do that? So it's just, it was a little bit of a trigger warning for me, which I know that's not a normal person's trigger warning, but for somebody that had really, really bad OCD and then now I have worked myself to a lower maintainable level of OCD, I think it was a little bit of a trigger for me, and it honestly makes me a little anxious thinking about it. But just,
yeah. That's
but
a good point. That there should have potentially been a trigger warning in there for OCD, and maybe some other things. Like there's not a point in the book where they like are actually suicidal, but there are moments where they could be leaning towards that. So I feel
yeah,
like we should
yeah.
have had a little bit more of maybe trigger warnings in this. I
Well,
agree.
in the whole story as well, because honestly, 5 feet apart, you don't really get that it's a CF journey, to be honest, either until they start discussing about their illnesses. So I think there should have been a lot of things that could have possibly been a trigger warning. I was obviously OCD is probably not one of those that most people think about putting a trigger warning in, but it did make me a little anxious with the whole situation. But it was definitely something that I was thinking about over and over again, obsessively, a little bit for a little bit after I read it for sure. But
Yeah, no. Well, I think you have to be
sorry.
cognizant when you write a book or do a movie or anything. I think you should be cognizant of any mental health issues that could arise from reading the book, and you should put a trigger warning in there that includes all of them, all any
Yeah.
potential. And if you read like any, you're gonna come at me for this. But if you're like any dark fantasies or dark romances, you do get abundance of trigger warnings, and those really are. I feel like the only books that you do get trigger warnings are because they're so like I don't want to say dramatic, but they're just like at a higher level, I guess maybe. And then in this book, you're right. I feel like there should have been trigger warnings for abundance of things, actually.
So then we move to Will's perspective after we meet Stella, which I also want to note as well. She did like host a YouTube channel where she was basically giving updates of her condition to viewers. And honestly, that really made me a little sad for her because she
Yeah.
had to almost like put on a fake facade and be like, "Hey, I'm so excited to be here." And then she would just immediately go back to herself of like, oh, I'm still dying. Like I don't know whether or not I'm going to live tomorrow. So it made me really sad that she felt like she had to fake that. But I feel like she had to do that in every aspect of her life. And it wasn't just YouTube, but it was also with her family, with her friends. I mean, her friends came to her hospital room, were like, we're going on this huge vacation that you were supposed to go on. Like, help us pick out bathing suits. And she's okay, I guess I'll help you. I wish I was going, but okay. But I mean, I get it. It's part of it, and she was probably used to it at that point, but that doesn't make it any less disappointing or anything like that either.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think like the movie doesn't harp on that as much as the book does, but I think from the very beginning we get a lot of good imagery. Like they're
Hmm.
very descriptive words, and we it really sets the scene for the entire book, which makes sense because it is a shorter book, so we had to jump in pretty quick. But there's a part where she talks about people are always looking at my cannula, my scars, my G tube, but not at me. And we really, from the very beginning, get that vibe that It's almost like she's not even a person. It's almost like
Hmm.
she's a thing that people are just observing and talking about and moving around and doing whatever they want, but she's not really enjoying it. And so that
Yeah.
becomes a common theme of the whole book. But it was really interesting to see how quickly we jumped into that too. I mean, from the start, we were like depressive.
Yeah, and I mean, when we meet Will, we get even more of that depression.
We get a different
He
type of depression, I think.
yes, he is really just given up on life is my perspective of what I got for him. He's only doing things for his mother. He's not doing things to live for himself, which obviously his perspective changes as we go on. You all read the book, so you know we're not spoiling anything for you, or at least watch the movie or something.
You
But
gotta do something because we're gonna talk about it. So otherwise, y'all might not want to listen.
stop here and go watch or read the book if you have not before you continue. But to me, his whole thing is just basically make it through this trial to where it fails so that way I can do whatever I want. Because he made some compromise that if he basically did this one last trial, if it doesn't work when I turn 18, I'm going to go do my own thing.
Hmm.
And to me, I get he'd been disappointed with trials before. So I understood it. But at the same time, I also just kept thinking, what if this one would work if you would actually do it the way it was set up to be successful? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
He,
I feel like if I had to pick Stella or Will, I have portions of Stella, but like my attitude on life would have been Will's.
yeah.
I would have related to that more than Stella's like, I'm gonna try to stay alive for my parents. I would have been like, if I just died, it would probably be easier and everybody else could move on and we could get this over with. I would have been the negative. I am a negative Nancy, is what my mom calls me. But I get what you're saying. He's almost like working against himself. If you don't
Yeah.
try, it obviously won't succeed. But also that effort and continuing to try and then being disappointed. So it's, yeah, I got you.
I get the disappointment, but my thing was even if it doesn't work for him, the research that they could possibly learn and how he reacted to it could help future people. So to me, I would have probably put myself in that. But at the same time, I personally, I know that my family has a history of cancer, and I just don't know if I would be hooked up to a chair doing chemo all the time if I came down with cancer. So I could understand where that comes from, but at the same time, I would almost just be selfless for my family. I'll do this for them, even if it continues to stick me in a white room. I don't know. I could see both sides, really. It's a hard debate that I have with myself just because cancer runs so deep in my family. So it's a hard debate that I have within myself thinking about that day that may come. So I can see where both sides come from, but at the same time, if he's already there, why not just go ahead and participate? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Just
well, and all that money that's being spent, resources,
mhm.
like I can definitely see that being more of like she says, somebody else could take your place. What the heck, dude? But also at the same time, cancer can be cured. You can beat cancer. But CF, there isn't a cure. And when you get B cepacia, you're going to die. There's nothing going to
Yeah.
stop that. So at the same time, I can see the I'm only here for a short time. I might as well enjoy that instead of being stuck in a hospital.
Yeah.
But I can understand both sides, and it's a very difficult situation. And I really hate that children are the ones that are in that situation and having to make
Yeah.
those decisions. It's awful.
Yes. I also want to notate as well in chapter 3, which I don't know if this is in the movie, but Barb in chapter 3, I had a little bit of a legality problem, I guess you could say, but she will ask her what Stella's doing here in the hospital, and she's like, "Oh, she's in here for CF. This is what's going on with her. Here's her whole medical history, basically." And I was just like, "Violates some laws here, Barb. I feel like that's not what's supposed to happen
You
here."
mean
But
you mean Barb tells Stella that he is there for Bisapecia and part of a
yes,
new
yes,
drug
sorry.
trial? Okay,
Yes, yes.
I got you.
And even though they
Yeah,
know each
that's
other,
that's HIPAA, babe.
yeah, I'm just some problems here, but I don't
Yeah.
know if that was intentional or to just establish like that relationship that Barb and Stella had or what it was, but to me, my red flag waved. It was like, whoa, 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 we're violating some problems here.
I think it was a shortcut to get to the point so we could get
Yeah,
past it and keep going maybe. But
yeah,
you're right, it is a problem.
yeah. And then we also get the short chapter where Poe, which if you guys are just tuning in, Mother, to the whole storyline. Poe, which is Stella's best friend, they both grew up in the same hospital as her. He also has CF, was eating breakfast. They FaceTimed and Poe ends up like choking. and the alarms start going off and everything. They all start rushing to his room, and she thinks that he's dying. Which honestly, as soon as I read that, I instantly called that he was going to die in the book. I did not remember the movie or anything. I'm pretty confident I have watched it. I'm not sure, but as soon as that scene happened, I was like, it's only in here because he's going to die in the future. But
Yeah.
that was a spoiler for me. But
I agree. It
um,
was obvious foreshadowing.
then the next biggest part is the rooftop scene where Will sneaks out to the rooftop and Stella ends up seeing him. And
Hang on, before we move on from Poe, I meant to add that I love the scene where Will was asking Poe about Stella and
mhm.
Poe played along like he was straight and Will was getting a little jealous and a little like, "Man, missing my chance." And then Poe was like, "Bro, I like dudes." And Will was like, "Seriously?" I loved that. That was fun to see the relationships of everyone else besides just the main characters. Sometimes books only really give you a deep dive into the main characters and the side characters are there, but they're really just to support the main characters. I like when we get to see more of the other characters interacting too.
Yeah.
It's
I think it was because it was a short book. There was not as much character building as I typically like. I mean, I'm one of those, we were just talking about it before we started this podcast. I'm one of the slow burner people where it just really draws out the scene and really
yeah.
establishes everything. And this one just seemed very rushed for me. And so it was a big problem for me to really connect with a lot of characters. When Poe died, I wasn't really devastated like I typically would be with a character because I
Girl,
really,
I bawled. I had to put the book down. I had to go get some tissues.
that's
I
not
knew it was going to
unusual
happen. I knew it was going to happen. And I still was like, ah. And then I wanted to watch the movie so I could cry all over again.
Honestly, to me, I just didn't have that. I mean, I had a start of a connection, but I never really got so deep involved in the character. And honestly, Stella and Will, there was more development because it was from their perspectives. But to me, it was very rushed, and I think it was just because it was a shorter book that was probably the case. But
Well, I
it to
think too,
me,
like an aspect of that might have been because their life is so short. And maybe it was like, well, when I get something good, I latch onto it. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. But that's the way that I read it in mind was that, well, they don't have that long. So you might as well fall in love in 2 weeks instead of 2 years because we'll be
well,
here in
and I
two
get that.
years.
And one of the other books that we're reading had a really quick romance, but to me, I was even able to develop more of a relationship with those characters than I was with these. And it may just be because I can't relate directly to their situation as well. So, I mean, that may be the case. But the biggest question I had most of the book was what happened to our sister. And then it was answered about halfway through. So, a lot of it just, there wasn't, oh, well, how was she made this way? Or why was she made that? Like all of it was pretty quickly answered and it wasn't really elaborated on. I don't really know how to describe it, but it just, to me, there was something missing that it could have had something more to make it more of a sad tearjerker situation.
No, I would agree. I think the story about the divorced parents, it was talked about and then it was just problem solved. We didn't actually get a buildup of the story and the details and then watch it slowly progress. We didn't get that. It just was there and then fixed.
And I'm sorry, but Barb snapping at the parents and then all of a sudden their marriage is fixed. To me, it was just, there is no, if they really truly hated each other that much that they seemed like they did,
Well, I
no
don't think
way.
they hated each other. I think the mom saying that when I look at him, I see Abby was probably the only real thing we got about the parent. And
But you
obviously
can't
the
tell me
dad
that
was distraught.
Barb yelling at them
No, I'm not
solves
saying
the
that.
looks at us and see
No.
happy.
No, I agree. It does not. And that's a common thing. And I don't know the statistics on it, but I have heard very often if parents lose a child, there's a 50-50 chance that they'll either split or it makes them stronger, but there's no in between. It either breaks you up or builds you up. And
Yeah.
and how they went from it breaking them up to then building them up, I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me.
It was just too quick for me of a resolution. There was
I agree.
no, I mean, it was them yelling at each other, Barb yelling at them, oh, we're solved, we're getting back together now that you've woken up for surgery after, I don't know, 3, 4 hour procedure, maybe 6 hours, I don't even know, but
Yeah.
we solved
Well,
all of our problems in that time period. We're
well,
happy, we're good.
and the movie barely goes into that at all. You don't get to see any of that really in the movie, and I would bet that's probably why, is because there weren't detailed scenes to film, and so they were like,
Yeah.
"We're just gonna have that in the background. It'll be mentioned, but it doesn't really exist."
Yeah. Into the rooftop scene and the next chapter was a little bit of that for me too. They have this snide conversation in the nursery, and then they have this rooftop scene, and then all of a sudden she's decided she's falling in love with him. And
Oh, see, I don't think she decided after the rooftop thing that she was falling in love with him, though.
she says
That's when.
that she doesn't want him to die, and that's when she determines she's going to try to save him by making sure he does his treatments too. To me, I took it as she instantly started falling in love with him and wanted him. But it could also be the OCD. I do understand that as well. So it could
That's
be
how I
a
took it,
little
was
bit
her
as well.
OCD, and like because we just talked about her being able to control what she can control, and the fact that she couldn't control what he was doing made her want to control it, I think, and that
Mhm.
is what I think started their love story, but I don't think she was in love with him at that point.
Yeah. I did really like the quote that was said on page 77. Will's talking to Stella, and he said, "Nothing's going to save my life or yours. Everyone in this world is breathing borrowed air." And
Yeah.
I personally think that that set his mindset really good into perspective. He feels like everybody's on this clock, and his is just shorter than everybody else's, and which is true. But it still makes me have a toss up of why not just try to do the treatments to make your clock go a little bit longer? I don't know. It just kept going back to that for me. I don't know. I kept trying to put myself in his shoes, and then the next scene it was like, okay, well, I feel like you could do a little bit more by this comment that you're saying the world's ending. But I don't know. I think because I'm not in that spot with my life, maybe I just could not fully understand where they were going from. So I think it was a little bit harder for me to connect on that level. But
Well, and we talked about it was very fast. There wasn't a whole lot of build up, just pretty much told us who the characters were. And I think if there had been more build up of the characters and we got to see more of the past, then maybe it would have been easier to understand why Will felt that way and why Stella felt the other way, you know. But we didn't. It just jumped headfirst.
yeah, and my thing about Will that really saddened me as well, because I know with Stella, her friends visited her, and I don't want to say rubbed it in her face that they were out still living, but it felt that way to me. Of they were trying to, I get they were trying to be supportive and be like, hey, look, this is going on. Aren't you so excited? You helped us do this trip. We're really disappointed you don't get to go, and we still want you to be a part of it. So we're going to send you pictures. And I get what they were trying to do, but to me, I would have probably taken it as a little bit of rubbing it in my face that I'm missing out on this.
See, I didn't take it
But
that way,
Will,
but I do think it could have been done differently. But also, they were 17, though. They're children, too. So it's
yeah,
hard
yeah.
to expect much out of a 17-year-old to know whether or not you want to be a part of it in some sort of way or not a part of it at all. You know? I don't know.
Well, and I think the thing about Will to me, there was a scene where he was telling Stella that he'd been all over the country at different hospitals getting treatment, and he said, "I've been everywhere without actually seeing anything." So I think to him that was a little bit of a reflection of the same thing, is that he's been traveling all over the world, but Stella's been sitting in a hospital room seeing all of her friends' fun times, where Will's more so sat in hospital rooms seeing the worlds without actually being able to go out and see the world. So I think it was a reflection there with the similarities between the two and how they interacted in their own space in the world. I don't know how to really describe that, but
Yeah,
you
like
get what
how
I'm
their
saying.
experience with CF was different.
Yes, yes. But it was similar in the same way.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Let me just add this. We're talking about Stella's OCD and her and Will's banter. I love when she tells him that she has. I guess it's because he finally gets to draw her. I think it's that scene. But she says that she has a list, and then he's like, "Well, what's on the list?" And she's like, "Well, do you want the master plan or do you want the daily one?" And he's like, "Of course you have two lists." I love that, and I can relate. So I was just like, "Oh, that's so cute."
if you know anybody with OCD, that's how life is. It gets really hard when you want to try to control a situation and you can't. And that's a flare up almost of OCD. So I get where some of the situations that with Will and trying to do his treatments and things like that, she was feeling, oh, this is something I can control, so I'm going to do it. But then Will wasn't really wanting to be an active participant in this control. So it made it a little bit of a challenge for her, which I also think played into their love story as well. Is he challenged her, she challenged back, but I don't think it was a voluntary like control that she was trying to do. I think it was because OCD becomes a very incontrollable thing if you let it be. So it's not easy to maintain. So I think that I personally related a lot more to the OCD aspects of the story than I did, of course, the CF. But I think that it really made me connect a little bit more to Stella, but also to me, she went a little overboard in some situations, but I can get where you can do that if you're OCD.
Yeah.
So we also learned that Abby passed away due to her basically trying to live and do things that Stella couldn't do from the hospital room. And she was filming them for her sister, and she ended up passing away. It was bungee jumping or something like that, wasn't it?
Cliff
Off a
diving,
bridge.
maybe?
Yeah.
Some dangerous activity that anybody any day could die from.
Yes. And so we end up finding out that, and to me, that was probably the sadder part for me. It felt like it builds up a lot of chapters and it builds up a lot of, I mean, literally almost every single one of my notes was what happened to Abby, what happened to Abby,
Yeah.
why have they not answered, what happened to Abby. And it was really sad to me to know that her sister really tried to live this life for her sister who couldn't. And that to me was really sweet as well. And that spoke a lot, I think, both on her parents, because Stella's here trying to live for her parents where her sister was trying to live for her. And so I think it was a lot of theme of Abby trying to live for Stella and keep Stella happy and excited and ready for life, and then Stella took that responsibility of her parents. And that sometimes happens with an older sibling.
You related to Abby probably the most character wise, and then both, of course, the OCD of Stella, though. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes. That was the biggest part of the character building. I think those two things emphasize a lot, that I was able to relate a lot more to get into the book more than I was, but it still didn't really, I don't know, hit the level there for me. I still feel like there was something missing.
It wasn't really
Yeah.
a deep dive. We sort of built up the relationship between the sisters, but we could have built it more. I will say, one of my favorite parts of the entire book is when Stella has to have her G tube exchanged. They have to cut the dead skin away, and she's never had a surgery or procedure without her sister. And
Mhm.
Will sang to her. I
Yeah.
was sobbing. I was like, "Oh, this is the sweetest thing I've ever seen in my entire life." I loved it. That was probably one of my favorite parts of the entire book. I mean, that was a good scene for
However,
me.
he did find out that that song, because he stalked her the nights prior on her YouTube videos and watched every one of her videos to realize that this was the first surgery without her sister. So he
Well,
went
he
through
in
all
the
the videos.
movie, it shows him stalking her the day before, but in the book, he starts watching her videos from day 1. So he
Yes.
wasn't he I it's not stalking if she posts videos on the internet.
No, but he wanted to get to know her, and instead of asking her questions, he watched her videos to learn information about her. So
I think it's
I would
hot.
guess.
She wouldn't talk to him because she was mad at him and he got on her nerves. And I thought it was hot that he was like, "Well, I'm gonna watch her videos and I'm gonna get to know her, whether she gets to know me or not." I liked it.
Yeah, I found it a little creepy, but that's just me. The one sad part that I did really feel bad for too is when we find out that Poe's parents have been deported while he was still
Yeah.
stuck in America dealing with this disease. That was really, really sad. And it really broke my heart for him, because I mean, no child should have to go through that alone with their parents in another country. And if he did die and never got to see his parents again. So that was a part of his death that broke my heart probably the most, was that whole situation.
That, and then also in the birthday scene when he tells Stella while he's cooking that Michael's coming tomorrow to have
Yes.
lunch, and then he dies before he can have lunch with Michael, that got me. That's a good little twist there. Good job. I love that birthday scene though. I love the
That
pretending
was
that she forgot his birthday and then had a little surprise party impromptu in the kitchen. I love that.
that was the most real life situation I felt like they all got to have together, even
Yeah.
though it violated Barb's rules. But I think it was probably the closest
Barb
they
was
had.
so mean.
I get it though. When she told the story about, I think it was Trevor and Amy, I think were their names, and
Something
how
like
she
that.
allowed them to fall in love and they got too close and they ended up causing one of them to get sicker than what they were. To me, I understand where she came from, because she probably did have a lot of guilt from that death. She didn't want to see it happen again, especially to somebody that she watched grow up in the hospital. And Barb probably became a little bit of a surrogate mom to her a lot too, because her parents obviously couldn't stay there 24/7.
Yeah.
So,
No, I totally understand why she did it and why she was feeling the way she felt. I am just not sure that the way she went about it was
yeah.
appropriate.
I did really like the little box of flowers that Will left for her after her surgery as well.
Yeah, so
That was
cute.
really
That and he
sweet.
hung the picture of the lungs in the operating room. Oh,
Yes.
that whole
Yes.
scene together about her going into surgery and then so that's when Barb yelled at him and after the surgery is when he stopped talking to her. I felt
Yes.
so bad for Stella because he did all of these like wonderful, lovely things and like built up this like we're gonna be in love vibe and then just stopped talking to her.
Yeah, she wakes up from surgery, luckily survived, and then
Never mind. But I mean, I do understand when Will got that reality check from Barb, I do understand why he was like, okay, I do actually really like her and I don't want to kill her. I don't want to be responsible for that. And it wasn't even about himself, it was purely about Stella. He accepted that he was going to die, but he did not want to ruin her chances of getting lungs and everything else. So I can understand it, but it still was really sad for Stella.
And I really liked the pool cue afterwards. First of all, I don't know where they got a pool, but
That's
I
a
did think
great
that was
question.
that was sweet. I think with that they're gonna not let cystic fibrosis take anything more from them, so they decided to go from 6 feet to 5 feet. And
Yeah,
I
I
even
want to
put
read
on
that
there who
quote.
pool cues could be so cute. To me, I really found that really sweet that she was just like, "Hey, I'm going to give this my all." But again, I feel like it was rushed too because he just ghosted her, and then all of a sudden she's like, "Here's a pool cue. Let's go swim."
Yeah.
And I was like,
Let's go
"Okay."
swim.
I mean, that's basically what happened.
They had a
So
first date.
yeah, but they ended up swimming at the end of the first date.
They
So
did end
that
up
was
swimming, but
part of the scene that I took.
there's not a whole lot you can do in a hospital for a first date. So
No, I mean, I think they did pretty good with both the birthday party and with the swimming and all that, the first date and stuff. I think A for effort for sure because I don't
I
think
agree.
there's a whole lot.
I agree. And this is what the quote is about that scene. I just want to read it real quick. So, as CFers, so much is taken away from us. We live every single day according to treatment and pills. Most of us can't have children. A lot of us never live long enough to try. Only other CFers know what this feels like, but we're not supposed to fall in love with each other. So, after all that CF has stolen from me, from us, I'm stealing something back. I'm stealing 304.8 millimeters, 12 whole inches, 1 foot of space, distance, length. Cystic fibrosis will steal no more from me. From now on, I am the thief. I love that. I thought, and
Yeah.
it's very un-Stella. It felt
Yes.
like a pivotal moment for Stella and her realizing I really haven't experienced much of anything good. And why not try just a little bit? It's like the putting their feet in the water, I think is a very good metaphor. She was just dipping her toes in the water, testing it out, and she ran head first after that. She liked him.
Well, and so we go into a scene right afterwards where we meet Will's mom. And the scene at first, I was real ticked off because I was just like, you don't know him. I was on his side. And then he opens up that present and it's something that he never even imagined. And instantly, I was like, man, he was such a jerk. How dare he speak to his mom like that? So I thought that scene was a rushed, but at the same time,
I
I
agree.
did have that emotion of, okay, well, she did know him really. And I don't think up until that point, he really understood that his mom was really just trying to save him. So she had more time to actually experience life with him instead of life with him and his disease.
No, I
So,
agree. And it was really cool to see how he talked about his mom to Stella and then his thoughts about his mom. So like to see that like he doesn't think lowly of her. He just wishes that she wouldn't force him to do these treatments and that what she would allow him to live rather than be stuck in a hospital. But after that scene I thought how sad that neither one of them are like listening and communicating about this so that they both can work together to maybe actually achieve something.
yes,
I,
yes.
I hate the miscommunication trope in any context. I hate it. Just open your mouth and say it. Makes me mad. I do not like it.
I did really like the story in the birthday party scene as well. The story about how they had snuck into the dementia ward and
Yes. That was adorable.
like tricked people. That to me was really cute. It was probably the most relatable part of it. I was just like, oh, they were able to be young, carefree, normal childhood. I mean, obviously not normal, but sinking into Midge Moore is not something that one of us do often. But it was just like a sweet little moment that was cute.
I agree. It was adorable. And I thought it was so very Uncilla-like also. So it was cool to
Yeah.
see that she's not always necessarily been so strict with herself and strict with others, that it's developed over time as she's been put through things over and over.
So then Barb catches them, and it's really sad too because and this again, I felt like it was rushed because as soon as they get done with the birthday party and they have like this happiest moment, it feels like 2 seconds later, Poe's dead. It was just instantly
I think that
within the
was the
same
point.
chapter.
I think that was the
I mean,
point.
I get it, but it was a high that I felt like could have been rode out for at least until the next morning or something like that, and instead it just went right back to the low point again. And I mean, honestly, it was the lowest point, I think, for the book. But then Will just decides that he's leaving and he decides to give Stella a night of a fairy tale almost, like where they venture out into the town. They decide they're going to go
Well, he
out.
doesn't give her a night of fairy tale. She says, "I'm going." And
Well,
he's like,
yes, but he
"No."
decides to go with her and make sure that she's going to be okay. And they just have a carefree night in the world. And that was honestly a really sweet scene. I really enjoyed their little figure skating on the ice and all that. And honestly, predicted that they were going to fall into the water as soon as that scene started. To be honest,
Yeah. I thought it was
I
sad that she goes outside and talk about the lights, and he goes, "It's gonna be like 2 miles away," and like how daunting of a walk to just get there. First of all, and still he was like, "All right, if you're going, I'm going. I guess we'll make it somehow." And he was like, "Can we not get an Uber?" And she was like, "No, I want to enjoy the night air and I want to breathe and live." And it was just so sad, I thought, because like the cold air has to obviously make it even harder to breathe. So they were like actively struggling while they're walking. The cold air is going to hurt their lungs. Like it just wasn't, I don't know. I I thought it just really showed like how fed up she was with just existing. And I don't know. I cried. I cried everything obviously, but it was just really sad because to me I've never thought of it like, oh, those lights are 2 miles away. I might not even make it the 2 miles to get there. I might pass out before I get there. And she's never seen the lights. I always just thought, why didn't she just take a cab to see the lights one year? After treatment or whatever. Like she's been out of the hospital. She's not always been in, but it's almost like it was too much of a risk to do much of anything. And that's just
Mhm.
sad.
Yeah, and I think too that her grief really overwhelmed her after Poe died, and she again, like you said, that she just really had given up at that point, and that to me was really sad. Whenever she got the text about the lungs, and she just decided to shut off her phone, it
Oh
was
my gosh, I bawled.
to me it was very sad because I mean she had been almost like putting on a facade. It really showed that she had been putting on a facade for everybody else that she wanted to live. And it was just like, but does she really? Does she really want to continue living like this? Or is she just decided she's going to live how it is? Or was it just Will, his energy brushing off to her that she was just like, well, if he's going to do this, then that's what I'm going to do. To me, it was a toss up between the two. But I really think a lot of it had to do with the grief that overwhelmed her. She was just feeling, I mean, heck, why even try? Obviously, it doesn't work. He did
Yeah.
everything right. Wasn't able to see his family, wasn't able to see his significant other. I think a lot of it had to do with the grief, but I think Will's energy, not really caring about any of it, really rubbed off on her to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, I'm going to read this part of the book because it really cemented for me exactly what she was thinking in the moment. But so she gets the text message, and then she's like, "This is what I wanted, what Abby wanted, new lungs." But I look across the pond at Will again, the boy I love, who has Beasapacia and will never get the opportunity in front of me. I stare at my phone, my mind whirring. New lungs means hospital and meds and recovery. It means therapy and potential for infection and enormous pain. But most important, it means I'd be apart from Will, now more than ever. Isolation, even, to keep the beast apacia far away from me. I have to choose now. New lungs or Will. I look up at him, and he smiles at me so wide that's not even a contest. As soon as I read that, I started bawling. I was like, oh my God. And then the next one is, I don't need new lungs to feel alive. I feel alive right now. My parents said they wanted me to be happy. I have to trust I know what that is. They're going to lose me eventually, and I can't control that. I think that's when she accepted the inevitable is going to happen, and I might as well enjoy it until it gets here. Because even with new lungs, they talk about the shelf life's only 5 years. And so
Yeah.
she was like, that adds 5 years, but then what? We're going to be right back here in 5 years. And that means no Will for those 5 years. I'm going to be miserable anyways, which is a little dramatic. You've only known him for so long. But at the same time, I get that death is impending for your whole life. Everything probably feels that intense.
Well, my problem that I had with that is that he already told her that once he turned 18, he was planning on leaving the hospital and going on his own adventure. She was willing to give up her opportunity to live, and she was willing to give that up even though he wasn't even willing to really try the trials to survive a little bit longer.
I think that might be part of it because it was so rushed that you're feeling that way because they literally had 2 dates and then this scene happens. But I think if it had been built up more, I think it would have made more sense because I don't think he intended to leave her at that point. I think he intended to stay around and stay in the trials only to stay near Stella. But then the lungs came and I think it changed.
Yeah,
Because he said when he turned 18 he was gone. And he's 18 and he's not gone yet. He stayed all day for his birthday. He wasn't planning to leave the next day. Like, he wasn't actively making plans anymore. But again, that's part of it because I think it was so rushed. I think that's really what it comes back to is that everything happened so quickly, nothing really got to be built up to get to that moment.
because then the other thing is, I mean, after they fall through the ice and he does save her, which I think was a huge risk, but obviously one that ended up working out in both of their favors.
But I don't know if you remember, but at the very beginning, he talks about one of his dark thoughts that he has is thinking about his last breath and how it will feel. And then
Mhm.
that scene where he knowingly
Her basically his
took
last breath.
his and gave it to her, and I was sobbing, sobbing, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you've gotta stop. It's too
I mean,
much."
it was a really sad scene, and to me, that was probably the most connected I felt to the book. Was that scene? He didn't care if he gave that to her. She honestly probably didn't care whether or not he gave it to her at that point either. That caused her to live. But I think to me, it was the awakening for him that he realized that he was not a good influence on her and that he needed her to survive and he was going to leave her basically at that point. And honestly, the leaving scene was the part that crushed me the most, to be honest.
Where he
Whenever he
talks
basically
about yes, yes,
like, him against the window and
and he
all of
says
that.
that, like, the movies were true, like, if you love someone, you let them go. I was,
Yeah.
again, sobbing, and I
I mean,
thought
that
the
was,
whole time, I really thought, like, with the technology that we have in this world, they still could have FaceTimed and stuff. They still could have been together by long distance, but they could have had something as opposed to nothing.
I think they cut each other off because of how hard it would be for them to stay apart. It was very obvious throughout the book that it was so hard for them to not be around each other. So I think honestly, if he would have kept talking to her, that she probably would have gave up on her treatments at some point and sacrificed everything again for him because she'd already been willing to do that once.
Well, but
So
with new lungs, it'd be different.
yeah, but like she said, with new lungs, she was going to have to be segregated from anything that could possibly get her sick or infections or anything like that. And I mean, he's literally a walking
I think that's
infection.
only the first part. I think it's while the lungs are adjusting to her body because then she travels the world. So if
Yeah.
she's that's pretty risky to
Well,
travel the world if you're trying to avoid
whatever
getting sick.
time period though, I feel like she would have probably sacrificed everything. I mean, she already decided she was going to sacrifice not getting the lungs for him. So I feel like that was probably why he decided to cut her off completely, which of course he stalked her still on YouTube and watched her videos and she probably continued to make them for him. So I mean, it was a cute tie into the beginning of the story for sure.
Yeah.
And then the notification appears from her app, so that was a cute little thing too.
Yes, I
Um,
loved that little like it wasn't a big part of the story and I wish we would have went a little bit more into it, but I specifically loved when she told him that she built an app and he was like, "You built an app?" And she was like, "Girls can code, bro." I I loved that. I was like, "Get him." It was so good.
she says, "My app is so simple, even boys can figure it out."
Yeah.
So it was a cute little line,
The
but
movie
I
cuts that out where she says girls can code, and then when it says it's so simple, boys can figure it out. The movie says it's so simple that you should be able to figure it out, or something like that. So it wasn't as
I
blunt, but
to
it's still cute.
me the ending scene was a really cute story, but still I feel like it was cut off and there could have been more to it there too.
I'm not
Um,
a fan of when the book ends, but the story doesn't end. So, like The Fault in Our Stars, for example, how we don't actually know what happens. I'm not a fan of those endings. I need an ending. I need to know what happens. I have to know.
Well, and even if they just said for the next 5 years, me and Will traveled the world together and took pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower, something along that lines, to me, that would have been more of a solid ending that I would have been okay with rather than just being like, oh, and we just glazed in each other's eyes and stood in this airport staring at each other, you know?
Yeah,
It's
well,
just,
and I guess it leaves it open ended so that, and that's what The Fault in Our Stars was about, so that you can imagine what happens next. But I don't want to imagine what happens next. That's why you wrote the book. It's your story. I like to know what you think would be the ending. For me, I believe that they probably did get back together, and he probably died shortly after that, which actually would have been a really sad ending and probably would have been really good to write. But
yeah. Well, and I mean, like, it's almost like The Notebook. You know, The Notebook had this story where you could out
I'll
what
cry
happened.
thinking about the ending of The Notebook. I can't do it. Oh my gosh. It's not even, I love the whole thing. And I love like the young couple's love story. But when we see them as the old couple in the nursing home and they die on the same bed together, it gets me every single, it doesn't matter how many times I watch it, it gets me every single
I
time.
mean, it is sad, but I mean, honestly, I just never imagined you cried this much.
What's funny is I don't cry about like my problems.
I
It's
know.
fictional. It's all fictional.
Yes, every bit of it. You
It's
attach way too much. You attach way too much.
it's
But to me, something like that would have made more sense. Like 2 years down the line, they're sitting in a hospital room. Will takes his last breaths, or something like that. I mean, even would have given some solidification to the story.
yeah.
To me, there's just something missing for me. And I mean, it was a good story, don't get me wrong. And for like a short read, just to be like a time filler and stuff. And honestly, I felt like I learned a lot about CF, but to me, it was just very rushed and very hard to connect just because I like that in-depth story that really goes into the backgrounds and gives you a lot more of a connection. Even if it was just like a here and now connection, I feel like it would have been more to me than what it was. But it felt like they had a lot of good ideas and they just shoved it like a little too much into one book. I mean, if they like, just built up a little bit of a story and took out a couple little parts, it would have probably made it a little bit better for me. I'm not really sure.
I agree. I think
It
I
was
think that
hard.
sometimes we get it's hard to balance a short book and a good story versus a long book and providing too much things. We just said that for Iron Flame, we thought there were several things that were repetitive and unnecessary, and as opposed to this one, it's too short, like we want more in there. And it's hard to
Mhm.
balance those two things. They might have considered writing more into it and then thought, no, this is how we'd like it to be. And maybe that's on purpose. Maybe that's for us as readers, again, just like the ending, to imagine what the background story was, to imagine what the ending is. Maybe that's the point, but that's not my preference, to be honest.
Well, and I feel like it was very mature context in a YA story. I mean, I get it was children going through this, but I think if me as a teenager read this, I don't know if I would get it as much as what I would now. I feel like there should have been a trigger warning for that too, that this may be more mature context than what a young adult should be reading. And it's not like in a sexual way or anything like that. I just feel like CF is really hard for someone to understand. I mean, even me not having anybody in my life that's gone through that, it was hard for me to understand what they were going through and what they were experiencing because I don't personally know anybody with CF, but I think it was hard to connect for me, and I just don't know if a young adult would be able to connect to that on that same level just because of the maturity level that it was at.
Well, and I think too, and we talked about this. I do know someone with CF, and like I grew up with someone who has CF, and he is still a miracle to this day. And so I understand the gravity of being surprised that they're even still living and things like that. And the treatments a little bit. I don't know all about it, but he was a friend of my brother's, so I'm a little familiar. And I think that for me made it more of a connection too, because I imagine his struggle and what he went through, and I know him, so it's easier to do that. But I think that we also could have gotten more of a background of CF, like from the
Yeah.
beginning. Not even an in depth, but more of like a timeline of since she was 6 till now, how many treatments she's done, what's happened to her, how many surgeries, even a data sheet, her medical records, some sort of thing like that
Yeah.
would have been better to set the scene to show how much trauma she really has endured because of and Will because of CF. And then it would have been really cool to see Will before he got the beast aphasia and then Will after he got the beast aphasia, because is that why he's accepted death at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Was he hopeful before he got beast aphasia, or was he not? There are things like that that are left out there that I think could have really built the story up and made it even more. I did enjoy it, but I will agree that it could have been built to be even better.
Yeah, and I think that my overall rating, just because it was hard for me to connect and stuff, was a 3.5, which honestly I don't like really. Anything lower than a 3 to me is I do not finish, but I force myself to read every book whether I want to or not. So it just may sit on my
We're
shelf halfway
different
read
that way
for
because I will
years.
put that thing up.
No, I have to see it out. But to me, I do relate really well with the OCD part of the book. I struggle with that. I did really feel a lot for the whole Abby situation and parents of divorce and things like that. It was missing something. And I could see where a lot of ways, if it just took an extra 2 or 3 pages to explain a little bit more, it could have been better. So to me, that was just why I ranked it so low, just because it was hard for me to do so. But I do appreciate a really good storyline because I do feel like it was sort of educational in a way as well. I mean, I knew of CF, but I didn't know a lot about like the experiences that people go through and stuff with CF. So it was really good on an educational level for me to like understand a little bit more about that. But it was just really hard for me to connect to it with that storyline because of me not knowing much about it. And I feel like even like you said, if they just had a little bit of medical records or something in the beginning, that probably would have given more context to make it a little bit more understandable, which I think was a missed opportunity as well. If you're trying to educate people, I feel like you really need to go into that full education and not just halfway do it. Like even the author's note in the back is that the treatment that Will was taking is not even a legit treatment. So I feel like there was just certain things that was added that it could have been more educational and what they actually experienced versus making something up that, you know, made just to make the story better.
Yeah, I agree. I would probably give it a 4 for me, but I agree with everything you just said. Absolutely, I think it could have been built up, and I also think that it could have been more in depth, and we could have been a little bit more educational. I do like, though, that it is about cystic fibrosis, and we get to see that. It's not in a lot of context, and I think from what I remember when the movie came out, it was one of first of its kind. I don't know if there are older ones maybe that I haven't seen, but that's the only CF movie that I've ever seen or heard of.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good in that sense because it opens the door into the conversation. But I do agree that it could have been more educational, it could have been more built up, and it was very fast. But I still really enjoyed it. And then I watched the movie and cried again. So I got my money twice.
I still would recommend to read it. It's very important to understand just different things out there that you're not fully aware of, because I think we as
Yeah.
humans get in our own space quite often and don't go out and step out and handle something uncomfortable that we may not understand
Yeah.
until it actually happens to us. And I think this was a good way to open that door a little bit to understand that a little bit more and experience that. And I think it's good for other people to do so as well.
Absolutely, I would agree. And that's something that I did enjoy while reading it. I will say that although it didn't go into super in depth and it could have educated more, it did include accurate information about CF, and that is so important. We've talked about this before, but like when you're doing a podcast, when you're writing a book, when you're making a movie, it needs to be accurate. Miseducating the public is not good. So, shout out to them for double checking their information, or if they knew it themselves, whatever, but I do at least appreciate that.
So, next episode, which we have already announced at this point, we will be reading At First Sight by Nicholas
Oh
Sparks.
my god.
We are really excited to deep
Beautiful.
dive into Nicholas Sparks. We're choosing for this month a little bit more emotional books.
This doesn't probably make any sense to anybody else, but we picked emotional because we thought of April and we thought of rain, so we correlated like rain with tears. Obviously, Emily's not going to cry, but Carly will cry enough for both of us.
Well, I mean, just because I don't cry doesn't mean it wasn't emotional, but
I know.
we will be reading that next week and reviewing it. If you have not already, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You can email us at like we read them at karlempodcast.com. If you've got any book suggestions, just message us. You can DM us as well, or just comment under one of our videos. Again, we always on Facebook and Instagram release what we're
On our
reading.
website.
Yes, in our website, and release a month prior in advance so that you guys have plenty of time to purchase it or read it. If you already read it, fantastic. Are really excited for this month and trying something different than the fantasy. So please make sure you guys do subscribe and like our channel. Send us feedback. You can also review us as well if you would like to. We really appreciate everybody's support. Thank you to our mothers who are still tuning in and watching, even though you have
You're
not read a
not
single
gonna
one of
read them.
my mom listened to half the audiobook for Fourth Wing, so progress.
My mom
But
listened to the episode and said, "Why are there so many dragons?"
but we think it'll be interesting for you guys to stick around and see what genres and stuff that we end up reading on.
As always, we promise to Carl 'em like we read them.
Theme song.